Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to America House Kyiv. I am so excited and so thrilled to welcome you all here in our big room of America House. My name is Tatiana Strelchenko. I'm America House Kyiv director. And tonight we have a very special event. Despite the weather, despite the snow in Kyiv, we are hosting, I believe, a truly interesting program which we called Ukraine's Hero Journey, Innovation, Resilience, and Enterprise on the Global Stage. Our program will be in a hybrid format, meaning that we have our guest speakers here with me on the stage, but also one speaker will join us online. And the audience is here in Kyiv, but also a lot of our participants can join us online as well. So for those who are watching us online, please be active, ask questions. You can leave them in the chat box, and our team will read them out loud to the guest speakers. I will also remind you that unfortunately we are living in dark times and there might be different circumstances happening, for instance, air raid alerts. If so, please follow the instructions from our team, from me. And in case of a blackout, we have a power generator. So there probably will be a moment of switching to the power generator soon. So please don't worry. We will continue the program no matter what. And with this, I'm so thrilled to introduce the guest speakers who came to us and joined us online. So I will read your bios, but please add more information if you feel like there is something missing during the conversation, okay? So with us tonight, Yuriy Kryvosheya, co-founder of Yakobu Books, Ukraine's leading online bookstore, and the person who launched the Books to the Front charity initiative. As an advocate for Ukraine's reconstruction, Yuri regularly speaks on topics like economic resilience, green urban design, and sustainable business. He also serves on the board of Suborna Ukraina, supporting orphans of fallen defenders and veterans, and chairs Prom Prilad. With us tonight also, I will just read in the order of the speakers on the stage, Rachel McVey, who is the editor of Innovation in Isolation, the story of Ukrainian IT, 1950s, present day, an upcoming book with IST Publishing and MacPaw. She's also an award-winning voiceover artist, and Rachel amplifies Ukrainian stories globally through projects with United 24, DIA, Trade Ukraine, Ukrainian, and more. And we also have here on the stage with me Audrey MacAlpine. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Audrey arrived in Ukraine in 2022 to coordinate foreign volunteers and now works as a United 24 journalist, covering innovation, business, politics, and frontline stories. I'm also very pleased to say that Julian Hayda also joined us online. He is an associate director of public engagement at Razom and leads advocacy efforts for Ukraine in the US. And it's exciting that recently his team helped secure $60 billion US aid package for Ukraine. Congratulations. It's very cool. So we have amazing speakers, and I think I really want the audience here to be also very active. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. Our team member will come to you with a microphone. It's very important that you speak into the microphone because we are streaming online so that people online can also hear your question. Check. Now it works. We're back. So, if I may, I will continue. And here we go. I have a few questions I prepared. And again, if you do feel like asking a question, please raise your hand, okay? So, today we are discussing the Ukraine's brand, right? Ukraine as a brand. What is it? And I'm really curious to hear both Ukrainians speaking on it and also our international American friends. What is Ukrainian brand in your mind? Whoever wants to start first, maybe Yuri.
I was just offering for my colleagues to start. But coming back to the notion of the brand, that definition might be different for each person. Because when, for example, companies or countries or individuals think about the brand, they might think about something that's going to be immediate on the surface and will have a large reach. I personally relate this to DNA. And if we talk about the brand, about Ukraine, there are so many aspects, important aspects of our DNA that I think define our brand today. One of the probably obvious things about which everybody is talking about is resilience today. However, resilience, I would like to suggest, has to be understood not as a contemporary phenomenon that everybody talks about what happened in terms of after the beginning of full-scale invasion, because actually the war is happening for much longer than that. But resilience of a historical nature, because if you dive deep into our history, we always have been fighting for independence, for our existence. If we talk specifically about Russia, I mean, there has been through centuries numerous decrees to eliminate and cancel our language, our literature, execution of our intelligence, of our elites, and so on. So, but despite how hard the situation was, it's like when you have in development, very hard concrete. Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian resilience, we still through the concrete as this flower, being existing and driving through. It doesn't matter what the obstacles are. So resilience is definitely one of the aspects. And when we talk about investments in business, that's an important concept to understand. Another one, I might be very biased right now, but I truly believe that we are at the capital of, or one of the energetic centers of freedom, of the true definition of freedom, freedom of choice, freedom of behavior. And actually, this is one of the reasons for which somebody is trying to punish us. And I choose my words very carefully here. And just while there are so many other aspects, I would like to say a humor and irony, because what helps us to get through the tough times, to remain resilient, to stay creative, is also our human irony despite the situation. And there are actually many interesting examples, which I'll be happy to share, but I'm sure that there are many other brand definitions out there.
It's such a good point Yuriy makes, that the brand has not just come up from 2022. It didn't just suddenly appear.
Right.
It's something that's been built over many generations. And when I was working on this book, Innovation in Isolation, which tells the story of the very scrappy computer scientists back in Soviet times that, against all odds, helped bring the Soviet Union into the computer age, that scrappiness and that resilience is so evident even back in the 40s.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Yuriy. What do you think, Audrey?
Yeah, I think scrappy is a great word. And when I hear this question, the first thing I think, especially even for Americans, because we're at the America House, but when we think of Ukraine, we think of scrappy, resilient, resourceful, inventive. And I do think, though, that this brand is one that's changing and has been changing. One of the things Timothy Snyder, who's an American historian, said in an interview with United 24 that Ukrainians are now sort of, they understand that they're very good at things, and they've always understood it, but there's a humility that's in the culture where even if someone was very good at something, they would be quite modest about it. And I think because of the war, there's a necessity. Oops, I'm not on. There's a necessity to, for everyone online, I was just saying that basically I echo these sentiments of Rachel, that one thinks of the word scrappy, they think of resourceful when they think of Ukraine. But and I was just echoing the thoughts of Timothy Snyder, who says that the war, though as horrible though it is, there have been some positives for Ukraine, one of them being that Ukrainians realize or are coming into their own in being very good at things. And this is, this is echoed in the Olympics, in the Paralympics, where they were some of the top performers and medal earners in the Paralympics. In Eurovision, first and second place in the last 2 years. And in the arts, I think it's this girl, Tanu Muino, who's done these Dua Lipa videos.
Mm-hmm.
There's a brand to being Ukrainian now, and it's something that's advertised, and it's a huge positive. And Ukrainians have always been there doing these amazing things, but now they're being recognized for being Ukrainians while doing it. And so I think that's a really interesting thing that's come out of the full-scale invasion.
Thank you. Thank you, Audrey. And I also want to give floor to our online speaker, Julian.
Sure. Thank you. I share all of your optimism. But I do. I mean, I'm personally, I'm a huge optimist for Ukraine. I do think, scrappy, resourceful. I think these are all things that you and I and the people in the audience recognize in Ukraine. But if I may offer a bit of a sobering note, a lot of my job is traveling across the United States and meeting with people in quote unquote flyover country in the American Midwest, in the South, to talk about Ukraine. And they don't pay attention to Ukraine in the same way that all of us do. They don't pay attention with the same biases, kind of rooting for Ukraine to win. They pay attention to Ukraine in the background. And the thing about a brand is that you can't always control what your brand is. Mm-hmm. And if your brand has been damaged for decades or centuries, it is very difficult to reverse that brand. Now, my time living in Ukraine, I know that things in Ukraine happen very, very quickly. And perceptions can change among Ukrainians very, very quickly. Unfortunately, among Americans, maybe not so much among Europeans who kind of see Ukraine and experience Ukraine and meet Ukrainians more often than Americans do. But Ukraine has, unfortunately, a very damaged brand that Ukraine has only in the last, not 2 years, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, started to unwind. For example, going to school in the United States, high school, 25 years ago, the textbooks that were published at the time, it's not that long ago, said that there was no such thing as Ukraine. We were learning about medieval Russia and Grand Prince Vladimir of Russia. Mm-hmm. So, if we're, and I'm pretty young. These are people who never heard about Ukraine until recently, and only in bits and pieces, unless they had a particular interest in international affairs. Or have a particular interest in certain culture. For example, a gay subculture in the US is very into Eurovision. Anybody else does not know what Eurovision is. So maybe they've heard a little bit about Ukraine. But there has been a lot of damage to Ukraine's reputation. And I think it's all of our responsibility as people who care about Ukraine to work on making sure that the good stuff, not just the stereotypes of the Cold War, the ideas of Ukraine being a backwater, which is what frankly a lot of Americans really do believe has to be undone. We need to highlight all the innovation that's been going on in Ukraine. We also need to make sure that it is the brand that is Ukraine. I mean, after the full-scale invasion, Ukraine's brand was Zelensky's brand. Zelensky personified Ukraine, and because brands can be manipulated, I was at the Republican National Convention, for example, this past summer, and Zelensky and Ukraine were synonymous, and plenty of conspiracy theories about what was about him as a person and how that reflects on the rest of Ukrainians, about all the yachts that he has and all the corruption he has, and we know that these things are not true, but this is something that we have to deal with head on. And so while, yes, to people who do pay attention, the brand is resilient, the brand is innovative, but to a lot of other people, it's still, it's still like you see in the movies. It's a dark country where people suffer. There was a fantastic study done by a Ukrainian filmmaker, Andriy Perimachenko, about 10 years ago. And sadly, a lot of the stereotypes that he followed still persist. And it's called Maids, Crooks, and Working Girls, How Hollywood Portrays Ukraine. Now, granted, that was 10 years ago, so Ukraine has done a lot to improve its brand since then. But if you look at like James Bond movies or sitcoms from the 1980s and 1990s, Ukraine was a punchline. And you can't undo so much of that with like a story of a Eurovision winner, especially if people don't know what Eurovision is. And so how do we let that reach America as opposed to Europe? Again, I think Europe is already kind of on board with the new Ukrainian brand, but how do we kind of like undo centuries of destruction of the Ukrainian brand by leading by example and just kind of being resilient and kind of sharing those stories in a way that isn't boastful, like Audrey said, but one that is kind of, humble and true and genuine.
Thank you, Julian, for this ice shower of realism, and I'm really thankful. I'm actually very thankful.
I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. I think it's important for us to be very open and honest tonight, and maybe find some solutions, or at least insights, or at least start these conversations. I do have a kind of a provocative commentary question to you, follow-up question. Even the word resilience, even though we put it in the title of this program, I feel personally, as Ukrainian, that it is being overused sometimes, that it's not necessarily a good term sometimes, because it can be very easily manipulated with, oh, Ukrainians, they are so resilient. Yes, they suffer, but they can survive. It does, like, you cannot rely, the whole world cannot always rely on Ukrainian resilience, because it's also not forever, like it's not an endless resource, right? But there is this image of resilient Ukrainians, they survive no matter what. What do you think about it? Maybe do you agree, disagree? And maybe we should be careful when using it, and maybe we should give additional senses to what it is. Even though I do agree that as a nation we are resilient, thank God, but maybe we should not only rely on it. Whoever wants to comment, if you feel like. No pressure though.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting when a lot of aid and a lot of empathy was at its peak for Ukraine, especially from the US before it became a sort of political issue. I think it was because people saw images of suffering.
Yeah.
And that's what made them feel impassioned to help. And maybe this tough sort of exterior is something that's detrimental, actually, to the sort of cause.
Is it evolving though with the full-scale invasion? Because as we all discussed, we were in the sprint, now it's marathon, right? It's a long-term situation. What do you think? Will it evolve somehow? Is it evolving already? Whoever wants to.
I look at this situation completely in a different manner. And if I may, just would like to challenge or to clarify what has been said, because it's one thing to talk about the definition of the brand and the components or ingredients of the brand. Another thing, if it's working or not. It's two different
things.
Two different things, absolutely. And yes, I do agree that there have been nuances in even in US. I lived in US for a long time, and I spoke to people many years ago, 20 some years ago, in the little towns. And there was mention about history books. Well, some people thought that prior to collapse of Soviet Union, some people considered us even as to be Asians. That's what they told me. But does it mean that some of the ingredients of our DNA are not true? No, it does not mean that. That's another question. What do we do with that?
Right.
Have we been good sellers of what we can do, as you touched upon? No. Yes, we probably were not good marketing people of what we can do. It's it's not only about being humble. It's about even sometimes not knowing how to do this. While at the same time, some other people where they were overselling in something for which they didn't have substance, let's say, right? And in our case, we need, yes, to do a better job. That's another conversation. But in terms of resilience, whether it's overused, dangerous or not, I think all of us have to understand that it's not a matter of linear function. Mm-hmm. Everything has to be measured in a complex and in terms of weighted average. It's not like, okay, resilient, so let them deal, they'll survive, and we'll just watch a movie and eat croissants while we observe. No, I mean, everybody also understands that we're humans, we're not robots. Everybody understands that, okay, if they're resilient, okay, then what specific focused aid or support we can do, take in consideration that potential asset, that potential competitive advantage. Because, for example, if somebody was not resilient, mm-hmm. or did not have some other fundamental values, then that weighted average of support will have to be changed, adapted, and customized. So I think it's a matter of what other messages in complex have to go together with resilience and a few other things and so on. And this being said, the situation is never going to be ideal. I'm sorry, I'm involved in a lot of different aspects in raising funds or support to Ukraine. For some people in the world saying, hey, you show the pictures of some people who are smiling, some kids, despite the fact that those kids are fallen heroes. That means they're not struggling enough. We cannot support. To the others, you're showing people struggling. They say, oh, they're struggling. We're tired of this. We want to see a better picture. I mean, and the world is as is. We're never going to be having an ideal picture. It's a matter of constructing healthy weighted average, and it's a dynamic situation. So it's a dynamic action as well.
And may I just to ask, do you really make sure you customize your message to the audience you work with whenever you do?
You have to, and as a business entrepreneur, you have to do the same. For instance, you're trying to get financing from IFC, IFI, development multilateral. There's one approach versus you're trying to get financing from private equity or VC, a completely different approach from IFI. You have to customize your approach and you have to do your homework, of course.
And I feel like this is a very good message. It's a very important one because sometimes we forget about it and just feel like everyone is the same, whoever reads your message, but they're not. Thank you.
We're in our bubble where
we
everyone
are,
is
the
the
same
in our bubble. This idea of perspective you've touched on, I think, is so important when we consider this very, I think, important question of resilience versus victim. So when people who are outside the situation say, oh, Ukrainians are so resilient, they've managed so far, like, honestly, it sometimes does feel a bit like that. It feels a bit like people take for granted in some circles that Ukraine is strong, we will continue no matter what. But at the same time, if other people are a bit cynical about this and take it for granted, that still does nothing to change the reality of the spirit and the strength that we have here. Today is the anniversary, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the anniversary of the Orange Revolution, right? Yesterday. And so when I look at that, and then I see what's going on now, which is substantially worse. But why do we have the invasion? Because Ukraine was strong enough to say all those years ago, no, we know what we stand for, to set its own path.
Thank you, Rachel. Just wanted to make sure, Julian, if you want to add anything here.
I mean, I think resilience is still a very powerful idea, and one that is true in describing Ukraine. But this is something that I face every day in my present advocacy work. And that is, it's one thing to survive, it's another to thrive. And Ukraine has been surviving. The national anthem, Ukraine has not yet perished, right? But we want Ukraine to thrive. And a lot of that's happening is kind of by comparison, like, Ukraine, what is Ukraine, resisting against? It's resisting against Russian occupation. It's resisting against corruption. It's resisting against historically, Western European colonial powers. Fortunately, those are no longer a threat. But, Ukraine is just getting enough to survive. What does Ukraine need to win? What does Ukraine need to thrive? And I think resilience is great for what we have, but it's not something we should aspire to.
Thank you. And this is an ideal, perfect transition to my next question. How do we thrive? And you mentioned that we are maybe not doing enough to market all of the cool things that are happening here. What do we need to do better? If you may share your ideas in terms of businesses, entrepreneurial efforts, but also maybe something else.
What do we need to do to thrive? Well, part of my work is with United 24 Media is to basically engage Western audiences, to translate news here in a way that Western audiences, particularly the US, can understand. And I think it's about painting a picture. We talk about, it's tricky going off of this last question about whether it's better to paint it as a resilient, a country that's resilient or one that is suffering. And this is something that we question all the time, is we want to put forward innovation, technological advancements in Ukraine, but we also want to show the horrors of war. And sometimes I would pitch something like, the comedy scene in Kyiv, or something cultural. And these ideas tend to get shot down because it's like, that's not what we want to show. And I'm constantly questioning why that is, and asking myself this same question of what is the best way to present it.
Thank you.
Briefly, I think it's important to always be acknowledging the help that we're getting. And yes, asking for more, but honey attracts more flies than vinegar, as they say. So I very much support discussing the war and our international allies as allies and friends. And perhaps I would like to see less, maybe less toxic rhetoric, if you know what I mean.
Totally, yeah. Thank you. Not blaming on, like, guilt blaming, right? But
Yeah.
mostly thanking for whatever is already.
Yeah, as much as we want to.
But there is also a lot to be thankful for, This is also very much true. Thank you, Rachel. Yuriy?
First of all, I do agree with the notion that Ukraine does need to get a better conversation in the world, but that phrase can be understood from many different angles. And that touches many different stakeholders. So coming back to your question, I think to myself, what we have to, who is we? I mean, are we only as Ukrainians, or we as all the people who support the true values and clearly see where is evil and where is not, and that we're fighting for the same principles, fighting everybody in their own way possible. So in terms of Ukraine, yes, we do need to improve to talk about our advantages. And another thing, if at the beginning, of course, there was chaos and everybody was involved in everything and trying to do everything at the same time and asking for everything, I think now we have to show, besides being systematic and focused, we have to show also that it's not only about a give me in terms of charity type of action, it's about win-win. So that combined with our strong advantages with opportunities here, we can show that, hey guys, by being engaged and helping us, you actually will win as well. And then when we target those audiences, coming back to customization and so on, then depending on what audience that is, if it's humanitarian, it's one approach. If it's investors, to show them what it is, because we desperately need JVs and FDI, because there is no local liquidity, there is no proper lending, doesn't matter who tells me what, and the resources are limited, and actually the businessmen, entrepreneurs who are supporting, and some of us are fighting and wearing many hats at the same time, it's a matter of time when the resources will go down if we're not going to get that support. So are we asking for support, or are we being creative and to generate through interesting deals and things like this? And another thing is that from kind of PR perspective, media perspective, I think we really need, and hopefully, our international partners will really step up and try to help us to deliver the proper message. Because besides lack of awareness and sometimes ignorance, about which we had mentioned in the beginning, we also have a powerful Russian effort in terms of misinformation, disinformation, where we have billions of dollars, without exaggeration, being invested right here as we speak right now. So we definitely need to take that in consideration, because you have to take in consideration environment in which you will operate with any particular workflow.
And may I ask just a very specific example? I know that Yakobo Books, you have a whole project on supporting critical thinking, right? Maybe you can tell a little bit more about what is available. Are there specific books on critical thinking? Are there like programs, projects that you run?
I mean, if we're talking about Yakobo, we actually a group of companies, and when we did our rebranding, actually, our rebranding was in terms of strategy less about us in the sense of what market share we want to have, but our mission. It was about our mission. Our mission is to make, or to help to make Ukraine one of the most reading nations in Europe and in the world, and therefore to achieve that, you have to do a lot of things, not just one. So we have a lot of socially responsible, if I may say, impact initiatives being launched. Like, for example, Library for Heroes. This is a program which I launched since 2014 when the war started, when we deliver books to our military units, to our warriors. And now we actually implemented our own application, because sometimes when you're in the front line, every extra gram, is a risk. Therefore, people can read electronic content. Whether they a little bit further, we help to form those different libraries, and actually the demand from our military is very diverse in terms of genres. It's not only about business nonfiction,
Right.
or only about history. It's like all genres that you can imagine. And people request, by the way, books in different languages and so on. And something that everybody has to realize, if you take entrepreneurs are one of the more largest clusters in terms of statistics, in terms of who is fighting, in terms of professions. Plus, we support, of course, families of our fallen heroes. Those are different things. I'm also on the board of DALAD, who would take care of psychological rehabilitation of our veterans. Those are specific books usually being delivered based on the protocols of the psychologists being participating. So we have to kind of follow the structure. Plus, we have inclusivity project together with the First Lady. I will participate there. And we have many other initiatives as well. And, we're obviously not stopping there. But
Thank you, Yuri. Anything else? Julian, I do have a question to you as well about Razom for Ukraine. I know that you have 5 core programs. And in terms of the international support, is there any specific focus that you see that gets more support than others from international donors? We have a siren.
Sorry, there's a ambulance going by. I mean,
It's out online.
A bit disconcerting.
We thought it's in Kyiv.
No, this is just life in Chicago. Make that what you will.
Chicago.
I mean, yes, we have 5 programs. I mean, I work in the advocacy program, which my particular role is in my team. We work on shepherding the conversation about Ukraine and policy on Ukraine in the United States in a pro-Ukrainian direction, as we independently understand it as a nonprofit, as an NGO, as an independent group. So our program has been getting a lot of attention recently with the recent election. We have been very involved in trying to make sure that Ukraine is not an issue, quote unquote, one that can divide people, but rather just a moral mandate as something that is not only in the interests of one particular ideological group or another, but is a matter of shared values. But we're actually a tiny sliver of what Razom does. Razom has a massive humanitarian operation in Ukraine. They do everything from medical to mental health care to all sorts of things. So it's a privilege to kind of be a part of this group, where if not the largest, among the largest nonprofits in the U.S. that it works exclusively with Ukraine. But of course, the issue of Ukraine fatigue. Ukraine had a moment 2.5 years ago where no matter what your ideological views were, no matter what your lived experience was, Ukraine was seen as the underdog. And now, through manipulation and through a lot of other factors, even just the passage of time, it's become just a little bit more challenging to make this a priority and kind of move this to the top of people's lists of things to care about. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, and I'm also not even sure if I'm well qualified to answer your question. But I wanted to comment a little bit about what we were talking about earlier, right before you asked me the question, and that is the greatest success that I see for Ukraine in the work that I do and that Razom does is when Ukraine is most authentic. So a lot of people in Ukraine like to, in my experience, like to compare themselves to other countries. Well, Poland has better roads. Russia has a more corrupt government. But and we go back to the example of Eurovision, which I did not expect to talk about so much. But you think every time Ukraine wins Eurovision, it's when something is in the Ukrainian language or in the Crimean Tatar language. Like it's something that's really authentic, something authentically Ukrainian. It's not when Ukraine is trying to imitate another country. It's not when Ukraine is trying to imitate Europe or riff off of something, or Western Europe, or riff off of something that from the Soviet or Russian history. Every time Ukrainians come to like what is their own, it makes the best case for Ukraine, and that is something that I often try to promote, is the idea of the authenticity of Ukraine. We have this, I think it's riffed off of Taras Shevchenko, but made popular by Antitila, the idea of, it is better there where we are not. But there's plenty of good and plenty of things to value and cherish and share with a world that is inherent to Ukraine. And I'm very pleased that I'm very sad that it took a full-scale war for this to happen, but I'm very pleased that now that is really becoming the case, where Ukrainians are truly proud, not in a destructive way or in a kind of a jingoistic way, but proud of who they are and what they've done and what they're capable of and what they represent and what their values are.
Thank you. And I do agree. I think we are, unfortunately, with the war and blood and tears and deaths, but we do go through the process of initiation as a country, and we do evolve and kind of grow up with this process. I see it in multiple ways. As painful as it is, it's probably still has a lot of positive impact on us as a nation. I do have one more question to Audrey, to you. I know that you've been to the front line, right, with covering materials, and all of us here, I'm sure, we do have something like a bipolar, living in the war, but also living in the peace. But do you, from your experience, when you go to the front line, it's a completely different experience, right? Do you think there is like a lesson that you learned from your experiences at the front line that you can share with us here? Because I feel like you are kind of, as maybe a mediator, not being a soldier or a military person, but still being there and being here. You observed. What would you share with us here?
I think one of the things that has struck me most about going to areas near or on the front line is just I guess the way that humans begin to skew what they think of as being dangerous and not being dangerous. For example, people in America think being in Ukraine is dangerous, versus us in Kyiv would think we would feel safe in Lviv, versus someone on the front line would think being
Chicago
in Slovenia is
Chicago. It is safer to be in Kyiv than in Chicago. I'm just
with these sirens, we're not sure. Sorry.
But yeah, I mean, and it's all quite relative. And soldiers who live there, a friend of mine, he was just going into, he went into Kursk, and they've now stopped journalists from going in, when he sort of disguised as a sort of something or other and went in. And it's this road, it's like a highway to hell, where there's just burnt out vehicles left and right. And these guys are just sort of like cruising down the road, having a bit of a not a laugh, but it's normalized. And I think that is something that I took away from it. How quickly, like a lobster in a boiling pot, how quickly one acclimates, and how dangerous that is.
Also dangerous, of course.
Yeah.
Thank you. Absolutely. Incredible experience. I want to give floor to the audience as well for your question. I have many. I can ask them forever, but I also want for you to guys ask your questions if you want. So raise your hand and our colleagues will approach you with the microphone. Yes, please. And also introduce yourself if you may.
Hi, Nastasha. I'm representing CIPA Press France. I'm Colombian and US. So I was born and raised in Colombia. And my question, I guess, goes there towards how would you, because US also has a huge influence in South America, and specifically Colombia, because we are the gate in a way the gatekeepers for them to go into further down the continent, and we also have been having a conflict for a very, very long time. How would you guys kind of reframe this, speaking to not the global South? I know there was a conference these past 2 days that touched upon that, but more towards, let's say, specifically Colombia, considering Zelensky just spoke to the university. There were 3 parliamentary representatives that visited the country. I don't know if it's too specific for you. How do you see that link or not in general?
I
Thank
love this
you.
question.
So answer.
I mean, I think, Ukrainians, I don't want to speak in generalities. I mean, everybody's different. Ukraine is incredibly diverse, and I think that's one of the reasons that Ukraine has thrived in many ways and has been so resilient. You look at I'm doing what I say we shouldn't do, which is compare to other countries, but you look at countries immediately to Ukraine's west, and they're ethnically homogenous. And they have really big issues with how people relate to each other and understand each other. But Ukraine is diverse in terms of languages spoken. Of course, there's the one national language that everybody is coalescing around, and I'm very happy about. But Ukraine, in fact, in that regard, I think has way more in common with the quote unquote, and I hate this term, but the global South, or the quote unquote third world, than it does with a lot of Western European countries or with the United States. And even though everybody aspires to the kind of lifestyle and the comfort that we perceive exists in the United States or in Western Europe, there's also something very important about shared experiences of being squeezed between colonial powers. And I think it's been, I don't want to try to relitigate this, but I think it's been a strategic mistake historically for Ukrainians to look towards these places that they idealize as the perfect society or the perfect country that they want to aspire to the negligence of kind of learning how people in very similar situations make do of the situations that they have. So I think Colombia is a very interesting example. I think there's actually plenty of countries in Africa that are a very interesting example. Where there's the perception that Ukraine is this European country, and therefore because it is European, it is wealthier and has fewer issues. But Ukraine is just about in the middle of like the African continent and has plenty of examples of countries that have overcome. I'll never forget in the first few days of the full-scale invasion, I believe it was the ambassador of Kenya to the UN said, hey, we have all these differences in East Africa, and yet we understand that borders have meaning and that people have inherent dignity. And we had to go through a very difficult history to understand this, a history that many Europeans never had to, but Ukrainians did. And so how can we kind of find those shared experiences and build off of that in a way that A, builds friends in those places because they're way more influential than we give them credit for, and B, in a way that is authentic to ourselves and authentic to them, and can kind of build solidarity and open opportunities.
Thank you, Julian. So does it mean, and this is the question maybe to you and also the colleagues on the stage, we need to work better and allude to the similarities with Global South so they are not yet obvious maybe to our countries, potentially partners in the Global South? Do you think we need to customize this message better, as we discussed previously, when working with them?
I think absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned this now, because even with us at United 24, for example, we know our biggest readership is the US, and behind that, Canada and the UK. But just recently, we've seen this big uptick from Brazil. And we're like, where did this come from? And I think that's something we're focusing on now, is how can we engage, again, this, I don't like this term either, this global south, but
Yeah.
how do we do that? I mean, even there's a lot of Foreign Legion fighters from Colombia who are here. I mean, exactly. And so what's that about? That's so there's a trend that is not understood. And I am myself curious about what readers from Colombia would kind of be interested by when it comes to Ukraine and what those links are. So I'm following this answer.
And especially considering that Russia, the Soviet Union, had a big influence in this part of the world and in Africa. It's so imperative that we keep pushing Ukraine's brand meaningfully in this region. A few years ago, when I first came to Ukraine, I was managing a team of writers at UATV. It was Ukraine's first international broadcaster. And we made a point of broadcasting in these regions because it is so important to challenge Russian narratives there.
Right. It's also about disinformation and narratives that being used. As even people here in Ukraine, Ukrainians ourselves believe in them, because they customize their disinformation campaigns on us as well, saying that no, you don't have supporters in these parts of the world, and people just start Ukrainians start believing in it. So this is so important. Thank you for mentioning it for us as well, to understand that not necessarily what we hear is true. Right? This could be like narratives produced by Russians, and we do need to tackle other supporters and other audiences and be much more open to this. And I think Yuriy has something to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a very good question because if you look deeper, people have to admit finally in many administrations that the current war aggression has a global effect, because Russia has been successful in penetrating a number of African regions and already been dominating, kicking out French, others, and actually getting the resources to finance their war against us, for example, gold or other natural resources. They're advancing. This is not secret information that's been in the news in some of the countries of South and Latin America. And therefore, I think it's even, I'll allow myself to suggest it's even in a U.S. interest actually to involve Ukraine to joint efforts and to use friendly, as of today, hopefully they'll remain friendly areas, Colombia, Argentina, and so on, in order to counter potential similar adversary expansion in South and Latin America, because maybe the current administration, while they're concerned with stereotypical Mexican aspect, maybe in the future the threat is going to be much larger and much more experienced. I'm talking about Russians. So I think, and actually Russians are active in all those territories and they're not stopping. So I think it's a matter to join forces and to get experiences sharing and be engaged. And by the way, understanding that helping Ukraine in such a way is in the U.S. interest, maybe there's going to be synergies. Maybe they'll understand, okay, some of the cost can be lower just because the center of being involved in a lot of geographies, can be one, unified, and instead of clusterization and having all over the place.
There's also this history of like Latin American countries being very skeptical of American power. And so I like what Yuriy is saying, is that, while I think unfortunately, and this is part of the Russian narrative, is that Ukraine and the U.S. have become synonymous in a kind of a bipolar new Cold War. It would be in the U.S. interest. I think, Yuriy, you are absolutely correct. It would be in the U.S. best interest to kind of bring Ukraine out as an example of a sovereign, independent country that, yes, is grateful to the U.S. for its support, but is also a separate country, one that is able to solve a lot of really big challenges and issues, and kind of lead by example as being a success story for the 21st century after the Cold War, as being a distinct place in a society that isn't being controlled from the outside, whether it be Russia or America or whatever, but a place that is authentically sovereign and democratic.
Thank you. Audrey?
I was just going to add that I think even from a U.S. perspective, with the most recent, the next Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is someone who is quite, I guess, was chosen for being quite South America minded, and that there is sort of a renewed focus on this region of the world. There was a lot of focus on the Middle East. There's been a lot of focus on Ukraine, and maybe that this would sort to dominate the dialogue moving forward.
Thank you for the comment. Very important. Thank you. I also want to make sure, guys, if you have questions, someone else, yes, please.
Hello. Thank you very much for this discussion. I'm Sergey Vakarin, and I have many things to tell, but one thing is Legacy Ukraine project, which was to present people of Ukrainian origin who made big contributions to the world literature, technology, science, sports, and so on. And as the topic is innovation, resilience, and enterprise, this is about innovation, enterprise, not only about resilience. And when we look at the people of Ukrainian origin, like Hedy Lamar, who is behind the Wi-Fi, when we look at Martin Cooper, who invented the mobile phone, there are other people in these books that we did, and these are inventors of PayPal, WhatsApp, of so many other things, people who invented the internet, and I can continue the list very much, but how do you think this could be used? Sometimes we did the exhibition at the World Expo 2020 at Dubai, and it was part of the Ukrainian pavilion. But still, there is not enough knowledge in the world that people of Ukrainian origin invented so many important things and are behind most of the things in the 20th and 21st century. There are Ukrainian names. How can it be used to glorify Ukraine's brand, not only as the resilient, but also as a source of innovation and enterprise?
Very good question.
This is such a relevant question for my work specifically. Thoughts.
Tell us about the project. Tell us about the book.
So, yeah, I have been editing this book, Innovation and Isolation, I mentioned, and it was a history book. It's like how computers started, okay. But at the core of it, I think it's not the story of the computer. I think it's the story of the seeds of Ukrainian enterprise entrepreneurial culture. At that time, these scientists were doing what had never been done before with a huge pressure, but with very little resources to make it happen. And when you go back through these stories, you see things that I don't think scientists in America had to think to do. For example, one of the earliest microcomputers was built because the inventor happened to get the wrong package of materials. He got a package of materials that was intended for another lab. But at that time, it wasn't a simple process of just requesting, I have an idea, I'd like to make this thing, can you send me? So you had people like secreting away little bits of machines, of parts, and working on their idea. And I really see this as being like the first generation of Ukrainian business people. And then, of course, later in the book, the second part talks about many examples of current Ukrainian innovators. We have in there the team of guys who actually helped to bring artificial, I'm not a tech expert myself. What is this? The generative AI, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they helped bring generative AI to mobile phones and mobile apps. And we're working with Hollywood studios to create body doubles before this was a thing that people talked about. That was happening right here in Kyiv.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you for the question and the comment. And anyone else?
This is an issue that is kind of very, very close to my heart as a member of the Ukrainian diaspora. Because the examples, Hedy Lamar, or even someone like my grandfather who invented powder drink, Tang, or Chex, for example. He was a very proud and kind of conscious Ukrainian. But he would have been the first to say that was only possible in America. And so the answer is how to make this possible in Ukraine, right? He always wanted to return to Ukraine, but Ukraine doesn't allow dual citizenship. Ukraine doesn't reward that kind of innovation, or at least it didn't before. He died right before the full-scale invasion, and so he wouldn't have been able to do those things. The resources that he would have needed to do that were not available. A dear friend of mine, Lubomir Romankiv, he belongs to a fraternity that I'm part of, invented the microprocessor. He was in Ukraine all the time, and he loved Ukraine, but he was an American citizen, and he could only come for a few months at a time before going back to the US. And so I think Ukraine has to kind of embrace the innovators that it's sent out into the world, and create the conditions for them to be comfortable coming back. It's very difficult to do in wartime. But it's I think, Ukraine has an amazing brain trust. And it's a matter of kind of taking pride in that. Some people, there's a very famous American actress who until 2 years ago did not identify as Ukrainian. She identified as a Russian speaker and as a Soviet citizen. You look at Wikipedia of all these famous inventors that have lived over the last several kind of decades, and it will say they were a Soviet inventor, they were a Soviet engineer. But if it's something bad, then they're Ukrainian, right? If it's good, if it's successful, it's innovative, it's Soviet. So we need to kind of Ukraine has to kind of own it, that they have people around the world doing these things who are self-conscious, self-aware Ukrainians, and to kind of bring that back into the fold. And so I think dual citizenship, streamlining, I have a temporary residency permit in Ukraine. The process is very, very difficult to go through.
Yeah, we know.
I know you know. So but there has to be accepting the fact that we're a diasporic people now, and we have been for the better part of a century, and not treating people who live outside of Ukraine with skepticism, but rather creating the environment and a kind of a place where people can kind of come and go and leverage what Ukraine has to offer, which is so much. And let's win first. Let's win the war first. But I think that's the first thing we should do.
Thank you, Julian. Yuri?
I guess I would just push back a little bit, Julian, against this idea that innovation is somehow not possible outside of Ukraine. In your grandfather's case, it was 2 generations ago. Okay. So a lot has changed since then. I believe it was last month, Dia was on the cover of Time magazine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true.
I do want to clarify. I'm talking about the example of the book that was brought up by the question asker was of historical innovations. I do think Ukraine is the place for innovation now, and I brag about Dia all the time. I brag about Prozoro and the Ukrainian anti-corruption system that would make an American journalist blush. Ukraine is innovating now, but that's a very recent or relatively recent phenomenon.
Thank you. Yuri, please.
There are several aspects. First of all, we do have to enhance storytelling, because that's what sells and always generates demand. And we need, your guys' help as well in your international support in terms of bring that storytelling. Because just to complement what you were saying, MacPo, for instance, this is one of our tenants, and Toronto Kyiv Center, one of our long-standing partners, Alexander Kasalan, who is the founder, a very humble, very amazing person, does probably more than most people, and not many people know about it, just as an example. But and by helping in storytelling to the world about such leaders, that will help them to generate more reputable equity in terms of as an instrument to do even more. That's one thing. Another thing is that in terms of historical aspect, I agree that there are so many beautiful names that have been engaged or actually founders in a lot of amazing things that the world needs to know. But let's not forget that Russia invested centuries, generations at the very least, to kill that, because all the talents, anything that was good, sports, literature, doesn't matter, was taken to Moscow and was portrayed as Russian. And that's not only during Soviet Union. They tried to steal Malevich They tried to steal many other, historical figures and still trying to do so. We should not wait. And maybe it's also about storytelling. Coming back to the conversation with diaspora, we as also Canada Ukrainian Chamber of Commerce working a lot with the Ukrainian World Congress, with the whole diaspora, and I see some people who left long time ago, for example, they have one view in terms of how things should be done, and there's young generation. I think maybe we can talk about these things in a new way. For beautiful examples of that, I don't know if you guys heard about Nigel Kennedy, who is one of the most known violin players from Britain, and he's a very cool guy. And he was saying that classical music is classical music. It's amazing. Everybody should love it. But if we would like to be successful, we as the classical music players, we have to present it in a new way. When we organized a concert here, for the second act, he came in an Aston Villa football T-shirt with a beer, and kids were sitting right here, and it was funky and cool while being classical music. So maybe to take lessons learned and to present those fundamental things in a new kind of way to generate interest.
I love it.
In talking about storytelling and different ways in which Ukraine can sort of export its culture, this Stalker 2 just came out. It's a huge video game that was postponed at the start of the full-scale invasion, and many of the creators went on to the front lines. Some of them, unfortunately, passed away. But yeah, it's just come out. And that is a huge, the whole setting of the game takes a place in the Chernobyl exclusion zone or inclusion zone. So that's quite creative, right? These ways in which Ukraine is sort of inserting itself.
And it's because of Stalker that many people know about Chernobyl disaster in the first place.
I believe that. I mean, and we just to sort of echo some of our discussions earlier, talking about, in general, Ukraine, unfortunately, at the beginning, it was a moral, dilemma for most of the world, and then became this sort of partisan issue. But our readership, for example, is mostly men 35 to 50 in the United States who are, as we've seen in our last elections, tend to vote in a way that one might expect them not to necessarily support Ukraine. But I think that our readership gives a different example. And I think that there is an opportunity to engage the Reddit crowd, to engage people who play video games like Stalker, and to bring them, into the fold and supporting Ukraine, which is maybe sort of an untapped demographic.
A way to be even more innovative in storytelling when it comes about innovations, right? So use different formats, use different approaches, own it, as Julian said, first, even to recognize ourselves, Ukrainians, what we created, because many of us don't even know about this. Thank you. Any other questions? We do have quite a few, probably just a few more minutes before we wrap up for tonight. Okay, then my last question for the night. What would be the words of wisdom from each of you to young innovators who are still in Ukraine, thank God, to make sure they are inspired and continue their fight? Who wants to start first? Oh,
you are saints. You are heroes. You are saints.
Yuri.
Well, when you say the words of wisdom,
the pressure is on.
we kind of have to grow up yet to a certain level to kind of be allowed to.
Piece of advice, okay.
But just recommendations. In many aspects, if you look even in the very tough environment in which we operate, with dynamically changing assumptions constantly that you incorporate in modeling different situations, it's still just do it. So sometimes you just you don't wait, you don't sit and analyze how difficult it is, you just act. That's one thing. Second thing is it's a long-term game. So every day you have to make, even if it's a small step, but still forward, because you're not always going to be able to move fast. But since it's a long game and we're in a way in an ultra marathon, when you look back, you're like, oh, I got the distance. And you actually get this distance not by quick sprints, but by persistence and making those steps. Another thing is, as I already mentioned, already realized that matters are not subject to linear functions. So you have to be very creative and sometimes build even triangular relationships. Like, for example, when a Ukrainian entrepreneur wants to attract, international partner, maybe to bring in a game DFI, IFI, because participation of such institution will help to decrease beta systematic risk, which will positively affect on the pricing of the project and therefore will make financial health for the project even much better, even in our forecast and calculations. So it's a matter of homework and try to think, in the complex situations. And when we think about complex situations, do not get discouraged in a way, oh, it's complex, it's too difficult, I'm not smart enough. No, because everything, end of the day, is a matter of a logical chain. Sometimes there are just many more components, but maybe take your time, unwind it, and everything is a matter of logical chain in any case. So therefore, coming back to the first point, just do it.
Thank you. Amazing.
I guess I would say, and maybe this is a bit, I don't know, but so I'll just say it. There is a saying that says, wars make careers. And I think right now there's a lot of eyes on Ukraine. There's a lot of foreign investment looking at Ukraine. And if you're inventive, you look at the United States in World War II and the result of that, even World War I, and how many inventions came from wartime. And I think that I think it's actually a prime time to be creating new things, and should be looked at that way.
Thank you. Absolutely. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Julian, Rachel?
We talked about Ukraine being a bit of an underdog historically in the global stage. And I see this so much as an asset because if you think about any kind of outsider group, ethnic minorities, women, people, even on the national scale, countries that have had to fight for their place at the table, what do you learn how to do? You understand how to talk to the people who have the power. So, Ukraine, I see the biggest asset here, curiosity about the world out there and about what resources are here as well, but also this ability to code switch, to be able to tell stories in ways that your audience will understand and will resonate with.
Thank you so much. Beautiful. Julian, the pressure is on.
Well, it's always better, instead of coming up with your own wisdom, to quote people who are far smarter. Audrey mentioned earlier Timothy Snyder, and Timothy Snyder's kind of great example being Hannah Arendt, who was very, very good at kind of identifying the issues and kind of the way that totalitarianism and suffering kind of comes to a place like Ukraine. And Ukraine and the Soviet Union were an example for her. And so how do we get beyond that? I think Ukrainians have made great strides, but there's a famous quote from Hannah Arendt about totalitarianism when the kind of the feeling is that anything is possible and nothing is true. And that can be a crippling feeling. And it's very easy, if you've experienced that in the past, to slide back into that. It's something that Russia is continuing to do through propaganda and create a certain cynicism and a certain negativity and a lot of doubt that kind of rings true in Hannah Arendt's words. But I think what is going to lead Ukraine to victory, and it's kind of is perhaps might be good advice, is to flip that on its head. So anything is possible. Not instead of anything is possible, but everything is possible. And in Ukraine, everything is possible. I've seen things that are like, Rachel would bring up Dia, and I know Dia has its, people roll their eyes at Dia sometimes because it doesn't load or whatever. But like, if I could have a driver's license in my phone in America, if I could deal with, I love in Ukraine when I can go to a CNAP, Центр надання адміністративних послуг. I tell people that it's like visiting like the doctor's office and the DMV at the same time, but it all works. and people like don't believe me, but it all works, right? Like that is possible in Ukraine. And if you put your mind to it, you can come up with a concept restaurant that is like deserves all the Michelin stars in the world, and it's always better in Ukraine. I just got back from France. The food in Ukraine is so much better, right? Like the chefs are better. They're so much more innovative because like everything is possible in Ukraine. And instead of nothing being true, you make your own truth. Like I'm not a moral relativist or anything like that, but like if you trust that what you're doing is right, then you can do it. And that is possible in Ukraine. And I think that can only come out of everything that Ukrainians have been through. And I'm very, very, very kind of grateful and very inspired by that Ukrainians have not fallen to that cynicism of anything is possible and nothing is true, but rather are adopting an everything is possible. And I know what is true, or I could make my own truth.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. I did mention I kind of dislike the word resilience, but I really love the word that Audrey used. It's resourcefulness. I think I wish all of us here on the stage, online, joining us online as an audience, to stay resourceful no matter what. And by the way, Julian, everything is possible is one of America House Kyiv slogans. Who knew? So guys, let's remember these words of wisdom. We really love them. I'm so thankful for all of you to come to America House despite this snowy weather and Friday evening, which could also prevent people from coming. You were here with us. I hope you found something really inspiring. I did myself. Thank you, our amazing speakers, for being with us, for sharing your stories and your experiences and your thoughts. Yes, we are, and maybe in some dark moment of Ukrainian history, but I do see light, and thank you for bringing up our attention to moments that we could lighten up to our audiences as well. So wishing all of you a wonderful evening and great weekend. Stay safe. Slava Ukraini!